Okay, we're on the last part of kinship and kin selection, and I will switch over to our PowerPoint slides a minute. Okay, so does kinship theory or kin selection predict that there's conflict in families, between family members? Should there be conflict ever between family members? Are there evolutionary reasons for conflict between parents and offspring or between siblings? That's the question. I think the kin selection theory would predict it, would predict that there should be parent-offspring conflict and sibling-sibling conflict. And here's why. So we need to think about, in terms of parent-offspring conflict, we need to think about parental investment in offspring. And we'll talk about this more in a couple of lectures down the road. But parents, from the parent's perspective, a parent should invest heavily in its offspring, but try to raise as many offspring as possible who are healthy, right? So to provide as much aid to each child as possible over your whole lifetime. So each child should be related, each child is related to a parent by 0.5, basically. They share about 50% of their genes with each child. So each offspring or child is equally related to the parent. So a parent should try to spread the wealth, so to speak, raise as many offspring as possible who are healthy. The offspring's perspective is a little bit different. In terms of how much the parent should invest, the offspring wants it to invest, in some ways, everything. The offspring has an R of 1 in terms of its relatedness to itself. It's 100% related to itself. So there should be selection for an offspring to hog as much as possible of the parental investment, if you will. It wants more resources from its parents than parents give to the siblings. That kind of makes sense. And now you can make all sorts of predictions about parent conflict offspring and study those and see if they pan out, given this idea of kin selection. And one of those deals with mating systems. So the prediction is that the mating system in a species may affect the degree of parent-offspring conflict in a population. So we haven't talked about mating systems, but there are different kinds of mating systems out there. Things like monogamy and polygamy. Polygamy can be divided into polyandry and polygyny. Polyandry means that there's a single female who may mate with multiple males. So multiple fathers of offspring. Monogamy would be there's a single male and a single female giving rise to all the offspring. Researchers predict that polyandry would favor more intense parent-offspring conflicts than monogamy, because as offspring have different parents, different male parents, they are going to share less of their genetic information with each other. And offspring should essentially want more resources from its parents than the parents give to other siblings, because those siblings aren't that closely related to them. They have offspring have an R of 1 to themselves. 100% of my genetic information is identical in myself, but maybe an R value of 0.25 or even 0.25 or somewhere between 0.25 and 0.5 in a polygamous or in a polyandrous mating system. Let's give you an example. So here is our hypothesis. Offspring will attempt to extract more resources from parents in a, let's go with poly means many, polyandrous, androus means males, in a polyandrous mating system than in a monogamous. Monogamous means one male, one female system. Now, how do you study this. This is crazy. Well, a researcher named Long came up with a way to study this in kind of an indirect route. And what Long did was Long looked at primates, closely related primates, and looked at growth rate of fetuses in utero in different primate species. Growth rate of fetuses in utero. This is something that mom can't control much. And when a female grows quickly in utero, when a fetus grows quickly in utero, that fetus is hogging lots of resources, lots of mom's resources. So fetuses tend to want to grow fast in utero. It benefits them to grow fast, okay? It benefits them to gain all those resources from mom, if you will, right? And there's a little bit of a conflict then. Mom wants to support this growing fetus, certainly, but mom also wants to, in primates at least, live for another mating day and have more offspring next year or 3 years from now, have repeated offspring events, right, or repeated reproductive events. And so Long decided to look at growth rates of fetuses kind of in lieu of the conflict between mom and offspring. Higher growth rates means the offspring is hogging more resources, so to speak. And monogamous versus polyandrous systems. And this is crazy how Long did it. Actually, I don't know if Long is a female or a male, but how Long did it. This person looked at testes size in the species that are being studied. Testes size strongly correlates with mating system in primates. Males that have big testes tend to be in primate species that are polyandrous, in which they have to mate a lot, and so they have to have a lot of sperm, and they have bigger testes because of it. Monogamous systems tend to have males with smaller testes. And so here we're looking at, in this weird graph, we're looking at fetal growth rate as a function of testes mass, when we can think of fetal growth rate as this kind of push of the fetuses to gain resources, if you will, and testes mass is in lieu of which mating system is stronger in the species. And what we see is fetal growth rate is larger in these polyandrous systems. Okay? The more polyandrous the species is, the higher the fetal growth rate. The more that the fetus attempts to extract from mom, the bigger the conflict between the fetus and the offspring. I mean, the offspring and the parent, the fetus and the parent, if you will, the fetus and mom. Really strange setup, but researchers are showing this again and again, that in polyandrous systems, we see a stronger parent-offspring conflict than we do in monogamous systems. Here's another kind of interesting situation in black-tailed prairie dogs. They're so cute. I love them. Anyway, most moms that give birth raise their young. They're committed to raising their offspring. But there are some mothers who give birth who stop caring for their offspring, and they just die. Like 9% of births, moms stop caring, and all the offspring die. Why on earth would mom ever stop caring? These are her offspring. Shouldn't she care about raising them to be successful, healthy young? Absolutely. And certainly the young care about. The young want to be raised. But sometimes there's a conflict. Mom may not be healthy. Mom may not have enough resources to raise these young. It might benefit mom to let these young die and live for another day so that she can reproduce again and reproduce successfully. And so we think that that's one of the reasons why some moms stop caring for their young. It's beneficial to them. It benefits them in the sense of their lifetime reproductive success. Okay, one more type of conflict that's kind of fun, sibling rivalry, aka why it stinks to be the youngest, basically. So siblings are typically related by a coefficient of relatedness equal to 0.5, right? R equals 0.5 for full siblings. And they should cooperate then. They should help each other because they're so closely related to each other. But individuals are more related to themselves. They have a R of 1 related to themselves. So when there's a problem, they should do what they can to help themselves and to not help their siblings. Selection should favor sibling rivalry when resources are limited. If there's an abundance of resources and everybody's going to survive anyway, then why not cooperate with your sibling who shares a lot of genes with you? But if it's like you or me, buddy, I'm going to favor myself. Selection should favor individuals who fight to survive, if you will. And this comes out all the time in bird species. Birds are kind of interesting. A lot of birds like little blue herons, egrets, red-shouldered hawks have what's called asynchronous egg hatching. So they'll lay, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 eggs, and the first egg that's laid hatches first. And then the second egg hatches, and then the third egg hatches, and then the fourth egg hatches. And so you might have a series of days between the oldest offspring in the nest and the youngest offspring in the nest. And that leads to asynchronous ability in fighting. The oldest offspring clearly have an advantage, right? They're bigger, they're stronger, they are more experienced, they're going to do better in times of limited resources. This benefits both parents and the oldest sibling. Because when resources are limited, parents may not be able to support 2 or 3 or 4 offspring. They may only be able to successfully raise one. By using asynchronous hatching, we know which one is going to survive. And when there are limited resources, then we would predict strong sibling rivalry, for sure. Okay, so if we look at something like, and I think these are the little blue heron experiment, something like their size at day 14 versus what the eldest siblings look like versus the last sibling. For example, the youngest siblings have much lower weights than the older siblings because, in fact, the older siblings are able to fight for more food, right? The same is true in egrets. We get kind of the same thing here. We're looking at the percent of food that they get to eat. Well, the first couple of chicks get most of the food. The last chick number 3 is in rough shape. If you want to, you can take a look at this video. This shows a video of red-shouldered hawk nest, and in the nest is one hatched offspring and then one that's just hatching. My sister studies red-shouldered hawks. She has a PhD in ecology and wildlife ecology, and she studies reproductive success in red-shouldered hawks that live in cities and in country environments. And she sees this kind of sibling rivalry all the time. Because of asynchronous egg hatching, the oldest sibs have by far the best chance of surviving, especially when there aren't very many resources. What about humans? Do we have sibling rivalry in humans? This is a picture of me with my oldest children when they were very young. And what predictions could we make about sibling rivalry in humans? You could probably make a whole bunch of them based on this kinship or this kin selection theory. And you can go ahead and try some. They're kind of fun. All right, one more topic in this chapter, or in this lecture, I should say, and that is kin recognition. For kin selection to work, you need to be able to recognize your relatives, right? You have to have some way of recognizing each other if selection can act on the level of kin, right? So how do relatives go about recognizing each other? There are a bunch of different ways, right? There could be simply a rule of thumb. So if it's in your care or your nest, it's yours. This must be my offspring because it's in my nest. Okay, it's a rule of thumb. It's good for species that don't nest in humongous colonies, so they can find their nest. It's super easy to find. They know that if it's in their nest, they should care for it because it's theirs. There are cheaters in this, using this rule of thumb. There are cheater birds, for example, whole species of birds that basically lay their eggs in the nest of other birds, and then they go away. And those other birds raise their eggs. It's ridiculous, even to the exclusion of their own offspring. But rule of thumb is one way that you can recognize your relatives. Hey, you're nearby. You must be a relative. Location might simply be sufficient. So if this is my home, this is my nest. If you're here, you must be a relative, right? Penguins, for example, know where the location of their nest. That must be their offspring for some penguins. Or maybe specific vocalizations or pheromones. Like you have a particular smell, you make certain vocalizations that I can recognize. So emperor king penguins, for example, live in large colonies. The moms and dads have to leave to go get food. They come back, they find their young, in part because of location, but also because of vocalizations that the young makes. Spadefoot toads, these guys are crazy. They must use pheromones to identify relatives. And here is some really funky research on them. Turns out that spadefoot toad tadpoles can either be herbivorous, feeding on plant foods, or carnivorous, feeding on other tadpoles. Okay, that's weird enough. But here's the real funky part. If these tadpoles, herbivorous tadpoles and carnivorous tadpoles, are raised alone, but then put together, herbivores, the herbivorous tadpoles, prefer to hang out with their siblings. Okay, so the 50% line is here. They prefer to spend their time associating with siblings. And they're not going to eat them, so that's good. Carnivorous tadpoles prefer to spend time away from their siblings. They don't want to eat they basically are trying to avoid eating their sibling. How do they know they're siblings? They weren't even raised together. Must be some sort of pheromone. Who knows? Unfortunately, if they're hungry enough, so at 48 hours, the proportion of prey that were siblings goes way up. So at some point they'll eat their siblings if they have to. But the idea is they can somehow recognize each other based on probably a pheromone that, you have a familiar pheromone, you have a familiar smell. You must be my sibling. I am not going to eat you. Kind of crazy, huh? Anyway, here are some review questions for this video or this set of videos. And we'll move on to use social behavior in the next one. That should be it.